John was terrified. He wasn't done processing the insane sight before him when the thing, whatever it was that had possessed his daughter, Emily, spoke to him. "Father, my turn is over. Now, it's your turn." Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Midnight Hour. Tonight, we have a chilling tale sent in by a listener via email. He wants to share the story of his family, who were targeted by a terror passed down through generations. One person would die. Not long after, another would follow, and so on, until no one was left. And this wasn't the work of a serial killer like the Zodiac or some backwoods madman. They were taken down by a powerful hex, a curse. Some of you might not believe in such things. Hexes are just superstitions, you might say. There's no such thing. But wait, after hearing this story, I guarantee you'll think twice about your disbelief. The curse I'm about to tell you about isn't just any hex. It's one of the most lethal forms of folk magic out there, known in some circles as the Hearth Curse. The name comes from the idea of the hearth, the fireplace, representing the center of a family. This curse doesn't just target one person. It's designed to extinguish the entire family line, one by one, as if snuffing out a single fire. In this story, the Hearth Curse befell a man we'll call John. His family life had been perfectly normal, quiet and happy, like any other family living the American dream, until, suddenly, John and his family were forced to experience a nightmare they could never have imagined in their entire lives. Just how terrifying is the Hearth Curse? Let's not waste any more time. Get ready, turn down the lights. It was a hot afternoon, and John was out tilling the soil in his large garden, which sat a good ways behind his house. He'd been working all day, and his shirt was soaked through with sweat. As he lifted the tiller for another pass, he heard a woman's voice call out from behind him. "John, don't forget your sun hat. It's scorching out here." The woman calling was his wife, Sarah. They had been married for years. John, hearing his wife shout, just gave a little wave without turning around. Yeah, I know." He continued his work as she walked over to join him. He was still pushing the tiller, but before the blades could even break the soil again, a sharp, violent pain shot through his stomach. He gasped, dropping the handles and clutching his gut. It felt like his insides were being twisted into knots. You might think it was just a bad cramp, but John knew this was different. He started shaking uncontrollably, his eyes wide with an agony he couldn't comprehend. He felt something rising in his throat, something foul and urgent. He cried out in pain until, finally, he retched, vomiting onto the freshly tilled earth. Do you want to know what he threw up? It was blood, thick and black as tar. He staggered, barely able to stand, before he vomited again. This time, it wasn't just blood. Mixed in with the gore were writhing centipedes, dozens of them. And what was more horrifying, they were still alive, squirming in the pool of his own blood. After that, John collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Sarah, seeing her husband's condition, screamed in panic. John, what's wrong?" She rushed to his side, cradling his unconscious body in her arms. "John, wake up! What's happening?" She was completely bewildered by what had just happened so suddenly. She screamed for help. "Help! Somebody help!" But no neighbors heard her. She yelled as loud as she could, but the area was deserted at that time of day. No one was passing by. Confused and desperate, with her husband unconscious, Sarah had no choice. She began to drag John's heavy body across the yard, towards the back of the house. She kept looking around, hoping to see a car on the road or a neighbor in their yard, but there was no one. When she finally reached the back door, she screamed, "Dad! Mom! Help! Please help!" A moment later, John's parents, Arthur and Martha, rushed out of the house. Seeing their son unconscious, Arthur cried, "Lord, have mercy! What happened?" Long story short, they carried John inside and laid him down on a rug near the kitchen. Sarah, her hands still trembling, cleaned her husband's face with a wet towel, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. After he was cleaned up, they moved John into their bedroom. Night fell, and John still hadn't regained consciousness. Sarah sat in a chair in the corner of the room, her heart filled with a gnawing anxiety. As she waited, she heard a strange sound coming from outside the room. It sounded like two pieces of bamboo being struck together, a rhythmic clack, clack, clack. The sound was distinct and clear. She had no idea who would be making such a noise. She decided to step out of the room to investigate. The house was quiet. John's parents had taken their granddaughter, Emily, out for an errand. so Sarah was completely alone in the house with John. She checked the front of the house, and for a moment, the clicking sound stopped. But then she heard it again. Clack, 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 clack. The same sound, but this time, it was coming from the kitchen. Slowly, Sarah made her way to the kitchen, whispering to herself, "Dear God, what is that sound?" She grabbed an old oil lamp for light and continued forward. As she neared the kitchen entrance, she suddenly froze, stumbling back a few steps. She shouted, "Who's there?" But there was no answer. There was no one there. When Sarah peered into the kitchen, she saw a shadow near the old wood-burning stove. It was the silhouette of a woman. She had long hair and a hunched posture, and she was slowly moving towards Sarah. Sarah was paralyzed with fear, able to do nothing but watch the shadow approach, silently praying in her heart. The shadowy figure drew closer and closer. Before Sarah could react, she was startled by a sound from the bedroom. Her husband was coughing. He was waking up. Sarah felt a wave of relief. She glanced back towards the bedroom, and when she looked back at the kitchen, the shadow was gone. A moment later, she heard John cough again, a deep, rattling sound. She ran back to the room and found him conscious, but still coughing violently. She rushed to his side and helped him sit up. He was clutching his chest, coughing so hard it looked like he was about to be sick again, and he was. He vomited onto the floor, and once again, like before, it wasn't just blood. This time, it was rusty nails, dozens of them, clattering onto the wooden floor. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered, horrified. John immediately went limp again. His face was pale, his eyes were open, but his gaze was vacant. Sarah cleaned the blood from his mouth and from the floor. She changed his shirt, which was soaked with sweat and blood. Then, she began to pray, reciting every prayer she knew, until John finally seemed to calm down. The next morning, Sarah rushed to the home of a local pastor, a man known in their small town as Reverend Michael. When she arrived, she told him everything that had happened to her husband. After hearing Sarah's story, Reverend Michael gave her a bottle of water he had blessed. He also gave her some advice. "Mrs. Miller, please give this water to your husband. Have him drink it. God willing, after he drinks this, he will find some peace. Furthermore, if your husband has been afflicted by some kind of witchcraft or hex, may this help free him from it. The most important thing is that you must deepen your faith and pray without ceasing. The greatest power belongs to God Almighty, and all evil will be defeated by it." "Yes, Reverend. I'll do anything for my husband. Now go home and give this water to John immediately. But before you do not forget to pray." "Thank you, Reverend. I will." With that, Sarah hurried home, clutching the bottle of holy water. She found her husband still lying weakly in bed. She opened the bottle and helped him drink. A few minutes later, John's condition thankfully began to improve. Sarah felt a wave of relief. Although John was still weak, he was able to talk a little with his wife. Throughout the day, his condition seemed to be getting better, but he still had to rest in bed until he was fully recovered. That evening, Sarah was spoon-feeding her husband some soup when they suddenly heard a sound. It was the sound of someone crying. John heard it too, and he recognized it. "That sounds like Emily," he said. The crying seemed to be coming from the bathroom. Sarah decided to check on her. She thought maybe Emily had gotten locked in or had fallen, but when she opened the bathroom door, it was empty. She checked Emily's room. Their daughter was sound asleep in her bed. But strangely, the crying sound persisted. Sarah went to the front of the house, thinking maybe it was a neighbor's child. She peeked through the curtains of the front window. There was no one outside. Completely baffled, she returned to the bedroom to her husband. John saw the confusion on her face. "Sarah, I'm sure that was Emily crying. What's wrong with her?" "It wasn't Emily, John. The crying sounded strange. I thought it might be a neighbor's kid, but when I looked outside, there was no one. The bathroom is empty too." Hearing this, John looked towards the front of the house and muttered under his breath, "Damn it, something's not right." Sarah noticed him mumbling. "What is it, John?" "Oh, it's nothing," he replied quickly. "You should get some rest, Sarah. It was probably just the wind carrying the sound." But there was something John was hiding. What was it? Sarah got into bed, lying next to her husband, and trying to close her eyes. After a while, the house grew quiet, with only the sound of the wind outside. Suddenly, Clack, clack, clack. The sound of striking bamboo started up again, coming from outside the house. Sarah, hearing the noise, shot up in bed. "That bamboo sound again," she whispered, frightened. She covered her ears and huddled closer to her husband. John, however, was sleeping so soundly he didn't seem to hear a thing. Before she could process the sound of the bamboo, Sarah was startled by another sound, a scream coming from the room next door, where Emily was sleeping with her grandparents. The scream was shrill. "Grandpa! Grandma!" Sarah immediately ran to the next room. John tried to follow, but his body was still too weak. He moved slowly, step by painful step. Sarah threw open the door to her in-law's room. There, she saw her father-in-law, Arthur, sitting on the edge of the bed, his eyes wide and staring at the ceiling. He was pointing upwards. He said something truly bizarre. "Child, there's a woman up there in a black dress, holding onto the ceiling. Her eyes are all red." Just then, John entered the room and saw the scene. He became hysterical, shouting, "Oh God, it's a hex! This is a hex!" Sarah turned to him, shocked. "A hex? John, what are you talking about?" Just as Sarah was about to approach Arthur to try and calm him down, her mother-in-law, Martha, who had been standing silently in the corner of the room, began to act strangely. Her face was pale, her gaze was fixed forward, and her lips were moving as if she were talking to herself. She chanted, "1, 2, 3, I will finish you all, one by one. Amelia, Amelia, you have returned." Emily, who was also in the room, ran to Sarah, crying and clinging to her. Sarah tried to comfort her. John, seeing this, turned and went back to his own room. Sarah was confused and panicked. What was John doing going back to his room now? She tried to gently question her mother-in-law, who was still in a strange state. "Mom, who is Amelia?" But John's mother didn't answer. Instead, she turned her head slowly and stared at Sarah. Her eyes were fixed, her expression blank. It was clear she was possessed. She stared for a long moment, then let out a chilling laugh, offering no explanation. After looking at Sarah, she turned back to the wall and began to slam her head against it, over and over. "Oh my God! Mom, stop! John!" Sarah screamed. Martha repeatedly bashed her head against the wall, chanting, "Amelia! Amelia! Amelia has returned. Now, it is my turn." Her words were nonsensical and terrifying. Just then, John returned. He was carrying the bottle of holy water from the Reverend. He took Emily from Sarah's arms and handed the bottle to his wife. "Sarah, you have to sprinkle this on Mom's head." Sarah took the bottle and approached her mother-in-law, who was still banging her head against the wall. Sarah opened the bottle, whispering, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." She sprinkled the water on Martha's head. As soon as the holy water touched her, Martha began to convulse violently. She spasmed on the floor, then collapsed. But before she passed out, she uttered a final, ominous warning. "You will all understand. Your hearth is locked. The price has been paid." Then, she lost consciousness. Meanwhile, Arthur, John's father, also passed out on the bed, his eyes still wide open in terror. John, still limping, helped his wife move his mother onto the bed. Sarah then rushed to get the first aid kit to treat the wounds on her mother-in-law's head, which were already swelling and bleeding. The next morning, after the chaotic night, John got ready to go out. He asked his wife to borrow a cane from a neighbor, as he couldn't walk properly. His legs were still too weak. He also asked her to call for a taxi. Sarah, assuming he was going back to see Reverend Michael, did as he asked. She thought he was seeking more consultation or spiritual guidance, but she was wrong. After the taxi arrived and Sarah gave him the cane, John told her he wasn't going to see the Reverend. He was going to see a man who lived in a different county, a root doctor known as Silas Blackwood. Sarah, hearing her husband was going to a folk healer, tried to stop him. "John, why? You should go back to Reverend Michael. He might be able to help us more. The holy water worked." But John was adamant. "Sarah, you don't understand how bad this curse is. I have to go to Silas Blackwood's house, or all of our lives are in danger." "But, John, enough, Sarah. You need to understand that this is about revenge, which means we could all die. I can't wait any longer." Sarah fell silent, watching her husband prepare to leave. After he was ready, John said goodbye to Sarah. He hobbled towards the taxi like an old man, leaning heavily on the cane. The driver helped him into the car. Sarah watched as the taxi drove away, her husband's words about the curse echoing in her mind. After a long drive, John finally arrived in the remote area where Silas Blackwood lived. As soon as they entered the region, the atmosphere changed. It was eerily quiet, and the air was colder, a damp chill that seemed to seep into his bones. The taxi continued down a dirt road until an old, weathered wooden house came into view. The yard was vast and unkempt. Even from the front gate, John could smell the strong, pungent aroma of burning incense, mixed with the faint sound of a discordant fiddle tune playing from an old radio inside. The taxi stopped in front of the house. After paying the driver, John slowly made his way to the front door. On the porch, an old man dressed entirely in black was sitting in a rocking chair, watching him approach. This was Silas Blackwood. As John got closer, the old man stood up and walked to meet him. "I've been waiting for you." "I'm sorry to intrude, sir," John said, "but I'm in desperate need of your help. My family is being terrorized." Yes, I know. Come inside." Inside Silas's house, John told him everything. Silas listened intently, occasionally shaking his head. At first, he remained silent, but when John finished, he spoke. "This is not the work of an ordinary person." "What do you mean?" "This is a deep-seated grudge, an old wound. From what you've described, it's a hearth curse." "A hearth curse?" "So, my suspicions were correct. Yes, this magic is meant to sacrifice one person, but the entire family gets caught in the fallout. The one who cast this wants you all to die slowly. Even those who have no direct connection to the issue will be affected." John felt a wave of despair wash over him. He thought about his wife, his daughter, his parents. "But, sir, can this curse be stopped?" "My advice to you is to go home. Your house has been marked, and honestly, I cannot help you overcome this. You'd be better off leaving your home, or everything will be lost. Please, sir, I'm begging you. My daughter, she's just a child, and my parents are old. You've already lost the nails that were in your stomach, haven't you? That's a sign that the price has been paid, but there is still a little time. You'd better find out who this Amelia is. She holds the key to all of this." "Ah, I see. I'll find out who Amelia is. Thank you." After getting this small piece of guidance, John returned home. On the way back, he racked his brain, trying to think of anyone named Amelia. He couldn't remember ever having a problem with anyone, let alone someone with that name. When he arrived home, his mind was in turmoil. He sat on the porch, trying to calm himself. A moment later, Sarah came out. "John, you're back. What did the man say?" "It's just as I suspected, Sarah. I have to find out who Amelia is." "Amelia?" "Yes, because she's the only one who holds the key." As they were talking, they were suddenly startled by the sound of crying again. This time, it was coming from the bathroom, and the sound was different. It was clearer, and it was obvious this was not a human crying. John and Sarah rushed inside. They went straight to their room to check on Emily. She was huddled under her blankets, trembling. It turned out that everyone in the house had heard the crying sound. Sarah quickly hugged her daughter, trying to comfort her, but Emily continued to shake and sob. "Mommy, I'm scared. I don't want to go to the bathroom." Sarah tried to soothe her. "It's okay, sweetie. It's okay. Mommy will go with you next time." After her daughter had calmed down a bit, Sarah went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. As she entered the kitchen, she smelled the distinct, coppery scent of blood. The smell was overpowering. She tried to find the source and lifted the wooden cover of the old well in the corner of their utility room. She gasped. The water inside had turned a deep blood red. "Oh, dear God!" She slammed the cover back down and began to pray frantically. After a moment, she lifted the cover again. Strangely, the water was back to normal. She grabbed a bucket, intending to draw some water. As she lowered it, she saw a reflection in the water's surface. It was the reflection of a woman standing behind her. The image was terrifyingly clear. Sarah screamed and dropped the bucket. The woman in the reflection was wearing a black, old-fashioned dress. Her hair was tied up in a bun, and half of her face was horribly disfigured. The shock was so great that Sarah fell to the floor near the well, repeatedly whispering, "Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy." A moment later, she heard her mother-in-law scream from her bedroom. Amelia has returned. Now it's your child's turn. Sarah scrambled to her feet and ran to her in-law's room. John was already there, tending to his mother. She saw her father-in-law rubbing his wife's face with a cloth dipped in the last of the holy water from Reverend Michael. After a moment, Martha thankfully fell unconscious and slept. That night, the atmosphere in the house grew even more tense. A fierce storm raged outside, with lightning flashing and thunder crashing. It felt like the world was ending. Thankfully, Emily, Sarah, and John's parents were all in their rooms. John, however, was sitting alone in a chair in the living room. He was staring at the rusty nails he had vomited, which he had kept in a small box. He looked at them, turning them over and over in his hand. He whispered to himself, "Amelia, who are you?" As he sat there, wondering, all the lights in the house suddenly went out. John jumped, startled. He stood up and headed for the kitchen to find the oil lamps. A moment later, Sarah, woken by the sudden darkness, came out of their room and joined him. "John, that's strange. The power doesn't usually go out like this." "I don't know, Sarah. Maybe lightning struck a transformer. The storm is pretty bad. Here, take this lamp so it's not so dark in the bedroom. I don't want Emily to get scared." "Okay, John." "John, do you hear that knocking sound?" "It sounds like it's coming from the attic, Sarah." They heard 3 distinct knocks coming from the ceiling above them. Strangely, the knocking had a rhythm to it. It wasn't the sound of a rodent or a branch hitting the roof. A moment later, the knocking changed to a dragging sound. "Screape! Screape!" John and Sarah stood in the dark, bewildered. What were those noises? Suddenly, they were startled by Emily screaming from the bedroom. "Mommy! Mommy! Someone's calling my name! The voice is coming from the roof!" Sarah ran into the bedroom to comfort her daughter. "What is it, sweetie? It's okay, calm down." Emily was terrified, sobbing uncontrollably. But the knocking sound returned, this time much louder, accompanied by the dragging noise. Suddenly, the ceiling in the living room collapsed, crashing down to the floor. John, who was walking towards the bedroom, was knocked unconscious by the falling debris. Sarah rushed out of the bedroom to check on him, and there, standing amidst the rubble, was the woman in the black dress. It was she who had fallen from the attic. But as soon as her feet touched the floor, she vanished. Sarah tried to get to her husband, but just as she was about to move, she heard the sound of eerie fiddle music coming from outside the house. Slowly, she walked to the window to peek outside. Strangely, there was no one there, but the music continued to play. And it wasn't just music. It was accompanied by a singing voice, and the lyrics were terrifying. "One hearth, soon to be cold. One hearth, a story told." Sarah didn't understand what it meant. Finally, she went to her husband and tried to wake him up. A moment later, John came to. The house suddenly fell silent, except for the eerie music that still played outside. John, newly conscious, just sat there, listening to the sound. Afterward, John and Sarah tried to clean up the mess from the collapsed ceiling. When they were done, John went to his parents' room to check on them. He found his father and mother lying in bed, their eyes wide open, staring blankly. John went to their side, stroking his mother's hair, then his father's. He was overcome with sadness, seeing his parents in such a state. A moment later, Sarah entered the room. Seeing her husband's sorrow, she tried to comfort him. "John, it's very late. Let's go back to our room and get some rest." "All right, Sarah. You go ahead and sleep. You're more tired than I am. How's Emily? Is she asleep?" "Yes, she is, thank God." "You go on to the room. I'll be there in a minute. I'm just gonna sit on the porch for a while." On the porch, John sat alone, smoking a cigarette and staring out at the deserted country road. He just sat there, lost in thought, smoking one cigarette after another. In the bedroom, Sarah couldn't sleep either. She felt restless. She could still hear the faint sound of the fiddle music in her ears. Finally, she realized her husband was still alone on the porch. She got out of bed and decided to join him. She started a conversation. "John, do you hear those strange sounds coming from across the road?" "No, I don't hear anything. But why do I always hear the sound of a woman crying? And it's always coming from the bathroom. And Emily, she always hears it too, at 3 in the morning. I don't know, Sarah. I still haven't found the answer. The last time I went to see Silas Blackwood, the only clue I got was the name Amelia. Honestly, John, I'm so confused about what's happening to our family right now. If I may ask, did you ever have a problem with someone in the past? Not that I can remember, John replied, his voice distant, his gaze fixed on the darkness. Let's flash back 3 years ago. It was a late afternoon, dark clouds gathering for a storm. At the small town hall, all the local men were gathered for a community watch meeting, including John, who was the head of the watch at the time. They were discussing important town matters when a woman in a tattered black dress appeared at the door. Her hair was messy, her face was pale, and her eyes were reddish and wild. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Excuse me." John, on guard duty, immediately approached her, his voice firm. "Who are you? What do you want here?" The woman replied, "I'm sorry. I was just looking for a place to shelter from the storm. I won't be long, just for a little while. I'm on my way east." John was suspicious. He looked the woman up and down. One of the other men leaned in and whispered to John, "Be careful, John. She looks crazy, or maybe she's up to no good. Look at her eyes. They're terrifying." Hearing his friend's warning, John became even more hostile. He was the head of security, after all. He raised his voice, trying to drive away the woman he now believed was a dangerous vagrant. "Oh, so you're a homeless person with no money and nowhere to go, and you want to stay in our town hall? You think this is a charity shelter? Please, sir, I'll only be here for a moment. I have no one left." "Enough of your sob story. This is not the place for you. This is my town. Now get out of here." "But, sire," I said, "get out, and don't come back. If you don't, I'll report you to the sheriff." John then picked up a broom and swept it aggressively on the ground near her, a clear gesture of dismissal. The woman, shamed and frightened by his outburst, backed away. She left, tears streaming down her face. The other men watched in silence. Some of them felt pity for the woman, but no one dared to challenge John. He stood at the door of the town hall, watching the woman disappear into the distance. That was 3 years ago. Now, let's return to the present. The memory of that incident suddenly flooded John's mind. Sarah noticed the change in his expression. "John? John, what's wrong? Did you remember something?" "Huh? No, nothing. John, be honest with me. I heard from some people in town a while ago that you once chased away a woman. Could she be the cause of all this?" "What are you talking about, Sarah? I had to do that. I was just trying to protect our town, that's all." "But what about now, John? Look at your father, he's paralyzed with fear, and your mother is acting like she's possessed, laughing to herself and always mentioning the name Amelia. A name I've never heard before, and I think it might be the name of the woman you drove away." "Enough, Sarah. I'm tired. I'm going to bed. If you want to stay out here, fine." With that, John stood up and went inside. When John entered the bedroom, he noticed Emily wasn't there. A moment later, he heard Emily's scream coming from the kitchen. Sarah, who had just come inside and was locking the front door, heard it too. Emily was shouting, "Daddy! Mommy!" The bathroom door opened by itself. She ran to her parents, terrified. She told them she had heard a woman crying from inside the bathroom. Before John or Sarah could react, they heard a loud crash from their bedroom. The house was still dark, lit only by the oil lamp. John quickly grabbed a flashlight from a drawer in the living room and slowly made his way to check the bedroom. Sarah waited at the doorway, holding Emily tightly. As John opened the bedroom door, the foul stench of decay hit him, spreading throughout the house. He instinctively covered his nose and forced himself to enter. Strangely, the room was tidy. There were no signs of anything having fallen. He was confused, looking around for what could be wrong. Suddenly, he heard a whisper right in his ear. "One hearth will be extinguished." After that, John quickly went to the bed and shone the flashlight on it. There was nothing there. It was empty. The next morning, John decided to find another healer. Silas Blackwood hadn't been able to offer a solution. He decided to seek out a man named Paul Soroya, another folk healer who lived in a neighboring county. The distance wasn't too far, so John set out on foot. When John arrived at Mr. Soroya's house, he found the man standing on his porch, smoking a cigarette. As soon as he saw John approaching, a look of fear crossed his face. He quickly went inside and slammed the door shut. John was confused. Why would he do that? But he didn't give up. He walked up to the door and knocked. "Mr. Soroya, Mr. Soroya, please open the door. I need to talk to you." but Mr. Soroya shouted back angrily from inside, "It's too late, John. I don't want to get involved. The demon you've angered will not forgive you. Your family will be wiped out one by one." John panicked even more. He banged on the door. "Please, sir, help me." But Mr. Soroya refused to take the risk. "Listen to me, John. What you did back then, you will now reap the consequences. The one you cast out with cruelty will return with catastrophe. Go away. I don't want any part of it." Defeated, John had no choice but to go home. On the walk back, he felt utterly hopeless. He was consumed with thoughts of his family's fate. As he was walking, he suddenly saw something at the end of the road. It was a woman in a black dress, her hair in a bun held by a golden pin. She was just standing there, watching him. Her gaze was empty. John thought to himself, could this be her? Could this be Amelia? He decided to call out, "Hey, are you Amelia?" But the woman didn't answer. She just stood there silently. After a moment, she turned her back to him and walked away, disappearing down the road. John was speechless. He continued his walk home. That night, Emily fell asleep in her room while holding a pencil. Suddenly, her hand began to move on its own, as if drawing something on a piece of paper. The drawing wasn't of mountains or a field, but of a woman in a black dress. And it wasn't just one drawing. There were 9 of them, all identical. A moment later, Emily woke up with a start and saw the papers filled with the drawings. Just then, Sarah entered the room. Emily showed her the drawings. "Mommy, I fell asleep, but when I woke up, these pictures were on my paper." "Good heavens, Emily, who taught you to draw this?" "I don't know, Mommy. When I woke up, the pictures were just there." As the night wore on, John couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, holding a kitchen knife. He watched the wind blowing fiercely outside, making the trees sway. At first, he saw nothing unusual, but then he heard someone laughing. He looked around, trying to find the source of the laughter. It was coming from behind the house. A moment later, he heard it again, the sound of footsteps, as if someone was sneaking around. He tried to dismiss it, to think positively. Maybe it was just his imagination. He closed his eyes, but when he opened them again, right outside his window, he saw a woman's face. Her skin was pale, and her eyes were empty sockets. John froze. The figure, which had been at a distance from the window, slowly moved closer. John wanted to run, but he couldn't move. The woman whispered to him, "The time is up." One by one, after hearing the whisper, John's vision went black, and he passed out. He woke up the next morning and immediately rushed to get help. He decided to go to the town sheriff, a man named Sheriff Brody. He found the sheriff at the county office, meeting with some of the townspeople. John burst in, begging for help. "Sheriff, please help me. My family, my wife, my daughter, they're all terrified." Sheriff Brody calmed him down. "Easy now, John. Sit down and tell me what's going on." It turned out the townspeople already knew that John's family was being terrorized. John told them everything, from the initial disturbances to what was happening to his parents. After hearing John's story, Sheriff Brody sighed. He called over 2 of his deputies. "We need help. I'm gonna call Father Thomas. He lives out in the holler at the edge of the county. I've heard his knowledge of these things is very strong." John, desperate, just nodded. Anyone who can help." That evening, Father Thomas arrived at the sheriff's office. He was an elderly man in a black cassock, with a white clerical collar and a long wooden staff. When he arrived, the townspeople who were gathered there were surprised. They knew of Father Thomas, but they also knew he was a very busy man and rarely came into town. He was a highly respected figure in the community. The sheriff and John explained the situation to him, how John's family was under attack. Before they could even finish explaining, Father Thomas sat down on a bench and closed his eyes. After a moment, he began to move one of his fingers, circling it in the air before snapping it shut as if catching something. Then he spoke. "This is not the work of an ordinary spirit. This is a rare curse." "A rare curse? What kind of curse, Father?" "It is a hearth curse." The townspeople gasped. "It is an ancient form of magic, passed down only in certain regions. Its dark roots come from the old folk traditions of the Appalachian Mountains. This curse is meant to target only one person, but the entire family of the target will also be affected. Within days, one by one, they will die. with the same pain and in the same way, and the final target will suffer the most. Father, can it be stopped? It is possible, but it will be very difficult. There are only two ways. First, the house must be abandoned, not sold, not mentioned to anyone. It must be left behind as if it were a cemetery. And the second way is to ask for forgiveness directly from the one who was wronged. But I doubt that is possible. The person who sent this attack is surely connected to a powerful dark entity, not just some ordinary practitioner. John, do you have any idea who might have sent this curse? John then told the story of what had happened 3 years ago, how he had driven a woman away from the town hall. He also mentioned that the last time he saw her, she was heading east. Father Thomas listened and then bowed his head, shaking it slowly. It is too late. That woman's revenge has merged with the land, with the ancient spirits of dark magic. This curse is now alive. John fell silent, his face a mask of despair. But Father Thomas didn't abandon him completely. He gave John several prayers for him and his family to recite, hoping it would at least bring them some peace. After everything was done, John went home. That night, when John arrived home, he was greeted by the sight of his wife, possessed. Sarah was sitting in the corner of the room, rocking back and forth, and humming an old, eerie folk tune. He immediately thought of Emily. If his wife was like this, where was Emily? He called out her name. Emily! Emily! He found her hiding behind a door, trembling and clutching a small doll. She said something that sent a chill down his spine. Daddy, I can hear someone walking around in the attic. The sound is very clear. It's okay, sweetie. Daddy's here. And just then, the strange noises in the house began again, growing more chaotic. There were scratching sounds, whispers calling their names one by one, and at exactly 3 in the morning, John's father let out a terrifying scream. It's ruined! This house is ruined! John panicked and ran to his father's room. He saw his father shaking violently, his eyes bulging, his mouth foaming. He was terrified. He kept pointing at the ceiling, repeating the same phrase over and over. The woman in black is staring at me. She's on the ceiling. Her hair is like snakes. Her eyes are red. The situation was dire. Blood began to trickle from Arthur's ears, and then he suddenly collapsed to the floor, dead. The next morning, the whole town came to John's house to pay their respects, including Sheriff Brody and Father Thomas. The sheriff put a hand on John's shoulder. John, this is a clear sign. Father Thomas was right. This house must be abandoned immediately. But, Sheriff, where will I go? I have no money left. My wife, my daughter, my mother. Where will I take them? John, the most important thing is to survive. You can earn money again. You can build another house. But a life, once it's been ensnared by this hearth curse, cannot be saved. John just nodded. The only way to save his family was to leave that house. That night, after the funeral for his father, John began to pack their belongings. Sarah, seeing him packing, was confused. John, where are you going? Father Thomas was right. We have to leave this place. But where will we go? This house has been in your family for generations. Why should we leave it? Isn't there another way? There is no other choice, Sarah. This is the only way. I don't want to see our family suffer through this terror anymore. Now get ready. Go get Emily. We're leaving tonight. I'll ask the neighbors to help carry Mom. Sarah, seeing no other option, obeyed her husband. After they finished packing, John went outside to call the neighbors for help. But as soon as he stepped onto the porch, he heard the woman's whisper again. 1 has been taken. 5 more will follow. John was terrified. He shouted, "Who's there? Who is it?" Sarah, who was coming out of the house holding Emily, heard it too. She said to John, "John, let's go back inside. Let's not leave this house." John looked at his wife and daughter, then paused. He seemed to be reconsidering. He closed the front door. They decided not to leave that night. It was a fateful decision. After they decided not to leave, they went back to bed. Around midnight, John was woken up by Sarah shaking him. "John, wake up! Wake up!" When he looked at his wife's face, he was shocked. Sarah's face was as pale as a sheet, as if all the blood had been drained from her. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Sarah replied, her voice weak. "John, my stomach hurts. It hurts so much." John quickly got out of bed, intending to make her some hot tea. But he had only taken one step when Sarah began to convulse violently, her hands clawing at the bedsheets. A moment later, blood spurted from her mouth, but it wasn't just blood. Large centipedes crawled out of her throat, accompanied by a foul stench that filled the room. John panicked. "Oh God, Sarah, no." Emily, who was sleeping with her grandmother in the next room, woke up from her father's screams. She ran into her parents' room and froze, her eyes wide at the gruesome sight of her mother. Mommy, what's wrong?" "Emily, close your eyes, don't look." But it was too late. Emily had already seen everything. The sight of her mother was truly horrific, with centipedes crawling out of her body. But Sarah was still alive, whimpering in pain. "John, help me." But John could do nothing. Her condition was too severe. He could only hug his daughter tightly. And then, Sarah's body went limp, and she died. John and Emily wept, holding each other. Afterward, John carried his daughter out of the room, telling her to wait outside while he cleaned up his wife's body. As he stepped out of the room, holding Emily, he saw his mother, Emily's grandmother, walking alone, as if sleepwalking, towards the back door near the kitchen. John called out to her, "Mom, where are you going?" He then told Emily, "You wait here, sweetie. Daddy's going to follow Grandma. I'm afraid something might happen to her." Emily nodded obediently. John followed his mother from behind. He saw her stop in front of the well. John called out to her again, "Mom, what are you doing? Do you need some water? I'll get it for you." But his mother didn't answer. She just turned her head and grinned at him, not saying a word. And then, she jumped into the well. It happened so fast that John had no time to stop her, and once someone went into that well, there was no chance of survival. John was helpless. 3 days after Sarah and his mother were buried, the house felt even more silent and cold. Every night, John would hear a whisper calling his name. "John, John, it's your turn." He tried to cover his ears, but the voice was always there. Sometimes it came from the well, sometimes from the kitchen, and sometimes from under the bed. He was growing more and more desperate. He tried to sell the house secretly, putting a small for sale sign on the fence. A few people were interested, but for some reason, every time a potential buyer came, something would happen to scare them away. One person would suddenly become possessed. Another claimed to see a woman in a black dress while touring the house. John was at his wit's end. He spent his days just sitting on the porch, staring into space. He barely ate. Fortunately, Emily was still trying to stay strong. She still prayed. She still read her children's Bible. But her father was on the brink of madness. He would even get angry at her for praying. Then came the final night. Emily was praying alone in her room, as usual, when she suddenly began to convulse. The Bible she was holding fell to the floor, and her eyes rolled back in her head. John, who was smoking in the living room, noticed that his daughter had suddenly stopped praying. He went to her room to check on her. When he opened the door, he was horrified. Emily was in a half backbend position, her body contorted unnaturally. John was petrified, and before he could recover from the shocking sight, the thing possessing Emily spoke to him. "Father, my turn is over. Now, it's your turn." "Emily! Emily! Your mother is gone. Now it's your turn? Emily, snap out of it!" The voice just laughed. After speaking, Emily collapsed, unconscious. John, panicked, rushed to her side, trying to wake her up. "Emily, wake up! Wake up!" But Emily didn't wake up. He shook her, but there was no response. He checked her breathing. There was none. Emily was dead, and just like before, blood trickled from her ears, and a centipede crawled out of her mouth, just like with Sarah. The next morning, Emily was buried next to her mother, grandmother, and grandfather. John, watching it all, was completely broken. That night, John was completely alone in the living room. After a while, the figure of the woman in the black dress appeared at the door of his bedroom, and this time, she showed him her true form. Her face was disfigured, her eyes glowed red. The woman walked towards the kitchen, then to the back door. For some reason, John followed her. He followed her out to the well, where she suddenly vanished. John, looking at the well, felt weak. He remembered his mother, who had drowned in that well. He stared into its dark depths. As he was staring, he heard someone calling his name from inside the well. "John, John." He leaned closer, peering into the darkness. And then, from the depths of the well, a hand emerged, a pale white hand reaching up towards him. John stumbled backward, terrified, and ran back into the house. Inside, he found the house in complete disarray, as if it had been ransacked. John suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. He clutched his head, screaming, until he couldn't stand anymore, and fell to the floor. He felt like he was going insane, and then he saw her again, the woman in the black dress, sitting in a chair, watching him. John couldn't speak. He could only stare at her. The woman, who had been sitting and watching him, suddenly flew across the room and grabbed him by the throat. She whispered, "Your time has come." John was too weak to fight back. She threw him across the room, and he landed near the front door. The woman in black slowly approached him again. John was on his stomach, but he tried to crawl towards the door to get out of the house. But he was too weak. He was exhausted. Finally, he gave up. He whispered, "Oh God, I just want to get out of this house." But the woman seemed to hear him, even though he had spoken softly. She shrieked in a rage, "No one is allowed to leave this house. This house is no longer yours." Suddenly, the woman was behind him, holding a yellowed bamboo stalk stained with blood. She continued to rage. "You called me homeless. You called me crazy. You drove me away." "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was just trying to keep the town safe." "My pain," answered with an apology. "That is not fair. You should know, I am not God. I cannot forgive." After saying that, the woman raised the bamboo stalk high above her head. She slammed it down on the floor. At the exact moment it hit the floor, blood spurted from John's eyes. Veins bulged all over his body, and his skin suddenly turned black and wrinkled. He screamed in agony, but the woman had no mercy. She just watched him, and she wasn't finished. She raised the bamboo stalk again and brought it down hard on John's back, and that was the end for John. The next afternoon, the townspeople gathered outside John's house. They had heard his screams earlier, but no one had dared to go inside, especially when they heard the sound of the bamboo being struck over and over. A short while later, Sheriff Brody arrived. He was confused to see the townspeople just standing there. "What are you all doing here? Where's John?" No one answered. One of the men just pointed towards the front door of the house, where a trickle of blood was seeping out from under the door. The sheriff's eyes widened. "Dear God, John." "All right, everyone, follow me." When they entered, they found John's body lying on the floor in a horrific state. Some of the men immediately called the police and the hospital. Sheriff Brody said, "Everyone, let's carry John's body out of here, and then we're gonna burn this house down." The townspeople obeyed. After they had carried John's body out, they brought cans of gasoline and doused every corner of the house. Then, they set it on fire. As the flames roared, some of the townspeople claimed to see the figure of the woman in the black dress standing amidst the fire. A few hours later, the police and the ambulance had arrived, and John's house had been reduced to ashes. It was allowed to burn completely to the ground. Afterward, the land where the house once stood was fenced off by the townspeople, and a sign was put up, warning everyone to stay away. Part 2. The second story. Now for a second story, also sent in via email, on the same theme, the Hearth Curse. There's a young woman, we'll call her Chloe. Her father's family consisted of 10 siblings. Today, only 3 are left. The other 7 died from causes that initially seemed normal, like heart disease or lung problems, but all 7 of them died from the same combination of ailments. And what's even stranger is that their deaths always occurred during the Christmas season. According to Chloe, the pattern of deaths was terrifying. At first, it was every 5 years, but then the gap between deaths grew shorter. 3 years, then 2 years, until finally, it was every year. The first incident happened around 2004, during the holidays. Chloe's grandfather had a fish pond at his house. He was harvesting the fish and cleaning the pond with his sons, a way to spend time together. After hauling buckets of water, the grandfather suddenly started coughing violently. It wasn't a normal cough. It was a deep, racking cough that shook his whole body. He kept coughing, clutching his chest, and had to sit down on the edge of the pond. At first, everyone thought he was just tired. He was an old man, after all. One of Chloe's uncles brought him a glass of water, but just as the grandfather was about to take the water, he collapsed to the ground. They all panicked, thinking he had fainted. They rushed him to the hospital, but by the time they got to the emergency room, it was too late. He was gone. At the time, the family thought it was a logical death. He was old. Maybe he had an underlying health condition. It was just his time. But 5 years later, in 2009, Chloe's family was struck by the same tragedy again. Her uncle, let's call him Mark, died of a heart attack. And when did it happen? During the Christmas season. From that point on, some of Chloe's father's siblings began to feel a little suspicious about the two tragedies that had befallen their family. Even though the time between them was long, the coincidence was unsettling, but many others in the family insisted, "It's just fate. Don't connect it to strange things." They were still trying to think rationally. 5 years later, in 2014, it was Chloe's aunt's turn. Her name was Brenda. One evening, she complained to her husband that she felt feverish and achy. She thought she had caught a chill. After her husband gave her some medicine, she felt very sleepy. She told him, "Honey, I'm going to sleep now. If I don't wake up, don't wake me." Her husband thought nothing of it. He assumed she just wanted to rest undisturbed. But those were his wife's last words. From that point on, almost all of Chloe's father's siblings were genuinely suspicious of the situation. Some of them were even becoming afraid. Every Christmas, they would wonder, who's next? 3 years later, in 2017, the same thing happened again. It was an afternoon during the holiday season. Chloe's uncle, Michael, was out on his motorcycle picking up some food. On his way home, with the sun setting, he was driving slowly and carefully. Suddenly, he started coughing violently. The coughing was so intense that he struggled to control the motorcycle. He felt a burning pain in his chest and had trouble breathing. The bike swerved back and forth until he crashed into a curb. He hit his head and died instantly at the scene. A few years later, in 2019, during the holidays, it was another brother's turn, named David. One night, after coming home from a Christmas Eve service, he went to bed. Suddenly, he woke up complaining that he was freezing, shivering uncontrollably. The family thought he was suffering from hypothermia, or perhaps a sudden illness. In their rural area, there was a traditional folk remedy using a black rooster, where the live bird is placed on the patient's chest. It was believed that if the bird died, the patient would be cured. But that night, the remedy didn't work. A few hours later, David passed away, leaving behind his young children. A few years after that, Chloe's mother began to think that all these deaths were not a coincidence and not due to hereditary diseases. The deaths seemed to be happening in a sequence, and only to her husband's side of the family. She tried to discuss it with her husband, but at the time, Chloe's father was also sick and didn't want to think about such supernatural things. So, Chloe's mother took matters into her own hands. She performed a small ritual, planting protective herbs like rosemary and sage on the graves of her husband's deceased siblings. She had asked for permission from the extended family, but they were mostly indifferent, telling her to do whatever she wanted. So, she did the ritual alone. But even after this, nothing changed. In 2022, again during the Christmas season, tragedy struck again. This time, it was another of Chloe's uncles. Let's call him Paul. He had been diagnosed with a lung disease and had been in and out of the hospital. But his condition took a sudden turn for the worse, and during that same holiday season, Paul passed away. And then, just this year, in 2024, still during the holidays, the tragedy finally hit Chloe's immediate family. Her father, Daniel, passed away. You'll remember I said he was sick, but he never believed in the supernatural connection to his siblings' deaths. He eventually succumbed to his illness and died. It was ironic because he had just been discharged from the hospital, with the doctor saying his condition was improving. At home, he seemed healthy, was eating well, and had even gained some weight. But fate had other plans. On December 23rd, 2024 at noon, Daniel passed away. The way he died was sudden. The whole family was gathered on the front porch. Chloe's brother, who works in another state, was on a video call with their mother. Her father, Daniel, was sitting next to her. Suddenly, he fell backward and was gone. A few months after Daniel's death, strange things started happening in Chloe's house. Every night, Chloe and her mother would hear the sound of pebbles being thrown onto the roof. If you've ever heard stories about curses, you'll know that this is one of the classic signs of a supernatural attack. One night, Chloe's brother was home and she asked him to check outside, thinking it was just some kids playing a prank. But when he checked, there was no one there. They tried to remain rational, thinking it must be troublemakers, but the strange thing was, the sound was heard almost every night. Their curiosity got the better of them, and Chloe's mother asked the neighbors if they had heard anything, but the neighbors said they were always asleep at that time and heard nothing. They tried to dismiss it again, but then the sound of pebbles stopped. Maybe it really was just pranksters. But one afternoon, Chloe and her mother were inside the house when a loud thud came from the roof. It sounded like a huge rock had been dropped on it. They rushed outside and looked up at the roof. There was a large rock sitting there, but when they looked around they saw no one. It didn't stop there. One night, around 8 p.m., Chloe was watching TV. She got bored and turned it off. Later, around 10 p.m., when the house was quiet, she was startled by the sound of the TV suddenly turning on, the volume cranked up to maximum. She was shocked. "I thought I turned that off." She quickly turned it off again. Her mother scolded her. "Why is the TV so loud?" All Chloe could do was apologize, even though she was sure she had turned it off. The TV incident was just the beginning. One day, Chloe, her mother, and her brother were going out. Before they left, Chloe made sure to unplug the TV from the wall, just to be safe. When they returned, they were shocked to find the TV on again. Her brother immediately got angry with her. "Chloe, I thought you said you turned it off. You're wasting electricity." "I swear, I did. I even unplugged it." Chloe went inside, turned off the TV with the remote, and then, out of curiosity, checked the back of the TV, and there was the proof. The plug was still disconnected from the wall socket. A TV that wasn't plugged in had turned itself on. Chloe was in shock. She went to the bathroom, washed her face, and prayed. It was all too much. Besides the TV, Chloe's mother would often hear things falling and loud bangs inside the house. But when she checked, nothing was out of place. They began to think that these were indeed supernatural disturbances. Finally, Chloe's mother decided to call a priest to hold a prayer service in the house, hoping to cleanse it of any negative energy or spirits. A few months passed, and there was no news of any more relatives dying. The family hoped that the cycle was finally broken. After all, Chloe's father had been the youngest son in his family, but their hopes were misplaced. It turned out that some of Chloe's father's siblings had consulted with a spiritual advisor. They told him the whole story, the chronology of the deaths, year by year. They also told him about the recent death of their cousin, the daughter of their oldest sister, Cynthia. Before Cynthia's daughter died, the family cemetery plot had been quite small, surrounded by bamboo trees. But with her death, they decided to expand the cemetery, clearing the bamboo and adding a new section. After hearing all this, the spiritual advisor told them, "You must be very careful." He explained that by expanding the cemetery, they had created new, empty plots. And in the supernatural world, an empty plot is an invitation. It begs to be filled. Chloe's family, hearing this, became extremely anxious. They were afraid that there would be more victims, destined to fill up the new plots in the cemetery. And what they feared came true. A year later, on December 8th, 2025, it was Cynthia's turn, the aunt who had just lost her daughter. She followed her daughter to the grave, and once again, it was during the Christmas season. Her death was sudden. There were no signs of illness. She seemed perfectly healthy, cheerful, and full of life. When the doctor's diagnosis came back, the family was shocked. The cause of death was kidney failure and a heart attack, but the family knew that Cynthia was very diligent about her health, getting regular checkups, and her results had always been good. There had never been any indication of kidney or heart problems. Looking back, they realized something else. Before each death, family members would have the same recurring dream, a dream of their teeth falling out. Chloe herself had this dream before her father died, as did her brother. Besides the dream, they would also experience another strange phenomenon before a death. Rice would spoil. Even if it had just been cooked, it would be left for a short while and be completely spoiled. It made no sense. Remembering the spiritual advisor's words, Chloe's family went to check the cemetery, and when they looked at it, they immediately noticed something. Next to Cynthia's grave, there was enough empty space for exactly 3 more graves. And if you remember, Chloe's grandfather had 10 children. 7 had died. That meant there were still 3 of her father's siblings left alive. her aunt, Anne, and her two uncles, Tony and Albert. That night, the extended family gathered to discuss what to do about the cemetery. During the meeting, a distant relative of Chloe's, a man named Dennis, showed up. Dennis was a second cousin. His father was the brother of Chloe's grandfather. Dennis suggested that he had a friend who was knowledgeable about supernatural matters, and if they allowed it, his friend could check the cemetery. The rest of the family was a bit suspicious of Dennis. For years, he had never attended any family gatherings. Why was he suddenly showing up now? But because they were desperate, they agreed to let Dennis bring his friend to check the cemetery. The next day, Dennis and his friend went to the cemetery, accompanied by Chloe's uncle, Albert. As they were looking around, Dennis's friend turned to Albert and said, "Sir, it seems clear that the problem is the size of this cemetery. It's too large, too grand. I suggest you make it smaller. But does this have anything to do with the three of us who are still alive? The empty space looks to be the size of 3 graves. It's possible, sir. And when you renovate the cemetery again, one of the late Cynthia's children must be present." Albert agreed and immediately informed the rest of the family. The next day, the whole family gathered again, this time including all the grandchildren. Dennis brought his friend again to explain everything. It turned out his friend was a lay minister who held prayer groups, which Dennis frequently attended. That's how they became close. When Dennis heard about the tragedy befalling his cousins, he brought the minister to help. The minister explained that it was highly likely the family was afflicted by a curse, and not just any curse. He called it a hearth curse, where the target is one person, but the effect spreads to all family members who share a bloodline. It's a generational curse. Everyone who heard this was shocked, including Chloe. It meant that she too could be a target of this curse. They asked the minister for a solution. He explained that there were 3 conditions to break the curse. First, they had to find a river that flowed in 4 directions: east, west, north, and south. Second, the minister gave them 3 small white cloth bags. 2 of the bags contained a yellow powder. He told them that some of the powder must be drunk while reciting a specific psalm, and the rest must be sprinkled around the homes of the 3 surviving siblings. The sprinkling had to be done while reciting prayers, circling the house 7 times at exactly midnight. The third bag, whose contents were unknown, had to be thrown into the 4-directional river. The family agreed to follow the minister's instructions. The following night, they performed the rituals, but even after doing so, they were still anxious. Would this really stop the curse? Would there be another victim? They prayed for forgiveness. They went to confession. They did everything they could. Meanwhile, Dennis and the minister were also trying to find out who had sent the curse and why, and the minister noticed something strange. During the rituals, he kept receiving spiritual clues, and all of them pointed towards Dennis. At first, the minister was confused. He didn't want to believe it. He knew Dennis was a good man, from a good family, and had no enemies. But the feeling he got was that the source was not Dennis himself, but someone connected to him by blood. One day, the minister spoke to Dennis alone. He showed Dennis a photograph of an old man, a known practitioner of dark folk magic. "Dennis, do you know this man?" Dennis looked at the photo. "Oh yes, that's old Mr. Abernathy. My father used to visit him. I remember my dad took me to his house once when I was in school. I know he's supposed to be some kind of powerful conjure man, but I never believed in that stuff. Is he a friend of yours?" "Dennis, forgive me for asking, but did your father ever have a problem with someone? Maybe with his own brother?" "What do you mean?" "Not that I know of. Well, maybe. Before my father died, he did have a falling out with my uncle over something, but I never knew what it was about." Inna lillahi. Now it all becomes clear, Dennis. Clear how? I have seen the whole picture now. The man in the photograph, he was indeed a sorcerer. I once tried to persuade him to repent, but he refused. He told me he was in the middle of a ritual to send a hearth curse. I also saw him using bamboo in his rituals, and I have a strong suspicion that the person who sent the curse was your father. Inna lillahi. No, that's impossible. Why would you think that? Because the last time I saw that sorcerer, I passed your father leaving his house, and my friend told me that your father was having a problem with someone. I just never suspected it was his own family. Dear God, then you must ask the sorcerer to lift the curse. I cannot. Why not? This is about the lives of my entire extended family, because my friend, the sorcerer, has been dead for a long time. He died about a month after your father passed away. Dennis was speechless. The perpetrator he had been searching for was his own deceased father. He was at a loss for what to do. How could he tell the rest of the family? The sorcerer who cast the spell and the person who commissioned it were both dead. This meant the curse couldn't be broken. The next day, Dennis and the minister went to Chloe's family's home. They gathered everyone and explained the entire, painful truth. Dennis apologized profusely to everyone. Afterward, they held another prayer service, hoping that it might have some effect. Chloe's family decided to make peace with Dennis's family, in the hopes that forgiveness might break the curse. But the question remains, did it work? Not long ago, Chloe received news that one of her remaining uncles, Tony, is now gravely ill, fighting for his life. His children told her that his condition is exactly the same as what her own father went through. So, let's all pray that the terror of the hearth curse that has afflicted Chloe and her family can be broken, somehow. Because as of the time this story was sent to me, Chloe and her family are still living in fear, with the constant, unanswered question, when will this curse finally end?